Hey, welcome to the Pleasure Points Podcast. I'm your host, James Rohr. Welcome to the episode. Jennifer Panzer Rohr, a.k.a. the wife, a.k.a. my wife, joins the show 3 episodes in a row. So glad that she's here. We talk about cats, our cat in particular, because Jen's here. So, of course, we're talking about our cat. And then we talk a lot about my experience with Native American ceremonies and the role of the trickster, the joker, the thing that tends to mess with our minds and can help us focus. So we cover a lot of ground in this episode. I think, quite frankly, I think it's the best one that we've done with Jen. So I hope you enjoy it too. Thank you guys for spreading the word about the show. We appreciate the testimonials and the reviews on all of the podcast sites. Couldn't do this without you guys. So without any further ado, enjoy the show. Oh yeah, baby. And we're live. Jen's on her phone. She's here, but she's on her phone because that's what influencers do. Hey, Jen. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Well, my morning routine was interrupted to be on the podcast.
I cajoled you into coming into the episode here. It's really because I'm a runner now, and I wanted to gloat about my fitness and block you from participating in your fitness so that I can remain superior in the fitness competition that is our marriage.
Well, your routine is now interfering with my routine because we do not normally film or record podcasts in the morning time, as it is morning now. It's about 9 a.m. And I was just about to do my workout.
And you've been awake for like 25 minutes, and I've been awake for like 4 hours because I get up early and greet the sun.
That is not
with
true.
My running strides.
Well, the cat did wake us up at, 5:15?
I don't know. She's a little punk.
Yeah, but she's so cute. She comes in and snuggles me, and she does her purr thing, and then she meows at you to let her out.
Typical.
It's very cute. Yeah, and then I sleep for like another hour.
Yeah, it's good. It's good for you to have your emotional support animal.
Oh, I just love cuddling the cat in the morning. It's like the best thing. I don't know if anyone else has a cat out there. I don't know if your cat snuggles in the morning, but we got really lucky. I've never had a cat that does that before. Normally they just meow at you because they want food. And remember we learned about that because our old cat, Siegfried, who now lives in Florida with his uncle, he used to meow like starting at 3:30 every morning, but like major meows. And we got Wyatt gave Jim a cat psychology book for Father's Day. And we learned in the book that cats, when they're meowing at you like that, they're actually hunting you, especially indoor cats, because they don't have the opportunity to hunt outside. So that is their way of hunting, and then having the reward is the food. And so it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and we also learned that cats don't naturally meow in the wild. That's like some manipulative nonsense that they created to mimic the sound of human babies to try to get human attention.
Dude, cats are aliens. They're awesome.
They might be our leaders.
They totally are. I feel like she is our superior in our house. I just bought her like a cat drinking fountain because she has been drinking out of the toilet, and I'm like, seems like I don't really want her drinking out of the toilet. But I think she likes the running water, so you can get like a drinking fountain for the cat where you just like put a glass of water in it and it just filters all the time, and it's like their drinking bowl, and she loves it. And the cat, I'm I'm buying the cat a water filter bowl. Like, she's definitely our leader.
Yeah. And I get the honor of cleaning out her poop box. It's like there's like some meme that's like how does it go? There's like a cat in outer space that's talking to a cat on land, and they're like, do they still worship us? And the cat is like, well, they feed me and they clean up my shit all day, so I'd say yeah.
And same things for dogs too, I guess. All pets.
Yeah, but dogs is like a different situation.
Yeah, because they're just like,
dogs are like happy to see you, and cats are like, you should be glad I've graced you with my presence.
Yeah, I would let you touch my tail.
Like, look at how special you feel every time that the cat snuggles with you.
Yeah, it's by choice.
Yeah, because you're like, oh, I don't know if it's going to happen, but it happens now. And so you're like, you're so grateful for it. But with a dog, you're just like, of course the dog's going to love you.
But dogs don't
Part
purr.
of dog medicine. That's the best thing.
Purring is where it's at.
Dogs don't purr. Oh, so this is fun. So I found my stethoscope from when I was in acupuncture school, and we were like learning all these things. And Jen has now been listening to the cat purr with a stethoscope.
Yeah, it's true. I do it a lot. If I can get her to let me like put it on her, because I don't think she really likes the metal thing. But if she's in the right mood, like in the middle of the day when she's taking her relaxing nap, if I can get over to her and get her to purr and put the stethoscope on. It sounds so cool.
It sounds amazing. I'd love to figure out a way to record it so you guys can hear it. Maybe I'm sure someone already has, but it sounds amazing.
Yeah. It's
It's
like,
like so relaxing. You get a sense of like it must be so soothing for the cat to be able to purr, like when you can feel that kind of vibration flowing throughout your body. I mean, it's not. I guess it's not unlike if we're like oming or something.
right, but like purring is amazing. It's like a different level of vibrational healing. I don't know what megahertz it is, but I'm sure that there are some like binaural cat purring beats that you can download on Spotify or something. I'm going to check it out, but I believe that it's really powerful for healing, and it makes sense why the Egyptians were worshiping cats, because they had that sound vibrational healing within their own body just naturally. It's amazing. Cats
Yeah.
are the coolest.
And so are stethoscopes. I remember when we got it for school, the first time I listened to a heartbeat in it was this classmate of mine, and I don't know. I mean, I just never had like tuned into a heartbeat before like that, and to hear the heart beating and like the sound of the blood moving, and it was like I just remember being blown away. It was like it sounds sort of silly to say, but I just remember being totally like in awe of the heartbeat and the sound of the heartbeat and like the sacredness of like my classmates' heartbeat
Yeah.
and how it's something that we just take totally for granted. But then to really like listen to it, especially with the sensitivity of a stethoscope, it was so cool. Like, so if you've never listened to someone's like heartbeat with a stethoscope, I highly recommend it. I don't know how expensive they are. I'm sure they're cheaper now from Amazon or whatever, but it's like in this process of healing and emotional healing and like dialing into yourself and trying to, like we talk about all the time here, like bring a good mood to humanity. It's valuable to remember that it's like the heart that drives all of that. I mean, Chinese medicine says that the heart is the emperor of the kingdom. Everything gets processed through the heart. Heart Math is a great institution where they're doing research on the power of like the heart and the magnetic field that comes from the heart and all that. And seeing in the news and just all the divisiveness that's been out there in the media and all this stuff, to remember that like there's a heartbeat with all of those people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just something, especially when you listen to it, there's just something that is so sacred about it, that it's good to, it's like a good reminder. And so I was excited to find that stethoscope. I don't know, it was in one of these boxes, and I was just like, oh. I remember you got pissed at me because you were just like, I can't believe you've had this for so long.
If I had $1 for every time I've said that to Jim, it's like I'm like getting into gua sha and like ordered the cool like gua sha that came with a beauty collection a couple months ago. It was a special with doTERRA with the yarrow palm, which is like my favorite serum for glowing skin and anti-aging and stuff. And I'm like so excited to get my gua sha, and Jim is like, I have like 6 of those. And then he just starts pulling out all of these different like different bones and different like jade and all these different materials. And he's like, oh, do you like these? Like you can totally use them. I'm like, what? Like, where has this been? How come? How come you just have this in a box somewhere? And I just am now finding out about it.
That's my move. Remember we were at the farmer's market here a couple weeks ago and we ran into, so Wyatt was in this like homeschool pod, and we ran into the director. And when he started homeschooling this past year as part of this collective, his mom was supposed to be there for the whole day. She was like, I'm just going to do it. And then her schedule changed. My schedule opened up. And so it turned out like over the course of the year that I was going more frequently. So then I started going in the afternoons with him for grammar and IEW writing, which, by the way, is amazing. If you guys are homeschooling, if there's any homeschool people out there, I'm a huge, huge fan of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, IEW. Their instructor is amazing, and their prompts and stuff, it's a great program. Anyway, so we were doing that in the afternoon, and then eventually I started having to go in the morning. Also, in the morning was where they would do science and math and like all these, like geography and kind of an overview of all these things. And when it got into science, when I was there, they were doing like dissecting owl pellets, and they started getting into geology, and they were talking about some archaeology things and the different strata in the ground. And I was an archaeology major at Stanford. And so, I'm just sitting there listening because I like to just listen to people do their thing. And so anyway, so Jenna never met the director of the school, and we ran into her at this farmer's market, and she started talking some smack about me. She's like, yeah, Jim is like, he's like highly trained in this stuff. And instead of like leading, he just is like standing in the background and then, letting someone else teach about something that he's an expert in. And then a couple hours later at lunch, you'll find out that he's like, oh, by the way, did you know like X, Y, and Z about all these things? She's like, he should have been teaching all this stuff.
Yep. That's your move.
That's my move.
I think they call it coyote medicine in the Native Americans.
Yeah, it's good to be unassuming.
And
Unless you're trying to build a brand and get people to like respect you and buy things you create.
And you think
and then being unassuming is kind of backfires. I'm like, here, I'm going to create a great podcast or I'm going to write an amazing book, but I'm not going to tell anybody about it. But those people that stumble on it, they're going to love it.
Well, that's the trickster energy, right? So for those of you who don't know the coyote totem and what that means, it's basically like the energy of the trickster. So it's exactly all the things that he's just saying. It comes up many, many times in our lives together. How you're just like, oh, I know everything about that.
Well, the idea of the trickster is that it's going to help you to trust yourself. That's in my experience, that's like the main teaching around a trickster. But in the Native American lore, I mean, all like just about every culture, especially ancient culture that I know of, has some version of the trickster there, because it's like the jester, the joker,
Right.
know. But the Native American things that I've done, the trickster is kind of not venerated, but honored and intentionally put into some of the ceremonies. So I was witnessing a Sundance. I wasn't participating in this one. I was just attending as a supporter, and they had in the Sundance, the dancers will go oftentimes with no food and no water, and there's not supposed to be any metal in the arbor,
Mm-hmm.
like nothing reflective.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll do this for up to 4 days. It's pretty intense. All sorts of lessons can be learned there. But in this particular Sundance, they had a trickster. This person dressed up like, I think they even had like a coyote, like fur on them and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then they were adorned in metal. So there was all sorts of metal, and they were moving counterclockwise, which is most of the ceremony moves clockwise, or all the ceremony moves clockwise, except for the trickster. And then the trickster had a bucket of water and would go up in front of the dancers and just pour water
Oh
out
my
in
gosh,
front of
that's
them.
so mean.
And these dancers, they have like these eagle bone whistles. So you're like, every exhale, you're whistling. So your mouth gets so dry so quickly. And then to have the to have
the
that
trickster
trickster
with the
come just
water.
like pouring the water out and the reflections
my
and the
God.
metal and all this stuff. It's just so intense, but it's such a great thing to like honor the fact that there's the trickster, to
Right.
call it out, so that you know that it's going to happen, because like we have all of these in our mind, the parts of our minds that are playing tricks on us and trying to get us to believe certain things and do certain things, or believe things about yourself that aren't necessarily true. And it's like to be able to just continue to like exhale, to continue to breathe, to continue to tap into your heartbeat, to pay attention to how your feet are hitting the earth, and to dance in a good way where you trust yourself. You come back and you say, okay, well, what am I focused on? Yeah, there's all these distractions. Sure, that water would be really appreciated right now, but I'm just going to get back to my prayer and sending my prayer out into the universe. And to be able to stay focused like that is huge. And it's funny. I mean, I've joked about doing running and stuff, but I have been running recently, and my eyes are maybe set at the Chicago Marathon. I don't even know if I can get into it anymore. I've never run a marathon before. In fact, the longest I've ever run was what I did a few days ago. I ran 7 miles for the first time ever, which was like a lot for me, because I've always hated running. But as I'm like embracing the fact that I'm running more, I think a lot about sundancing and just sort of like, your feet on the earth, and like
Right.
every step, like what is the prayer with every step? What's the prayer? And running, in my experience so far, can be super boring.
Have you ever read The Born to Run?
No.
Oh, you have to read it. That's going to be like your new favorite book. It's so good. It talks about the Tanimura, and they in Mexico, and they run barefoot for miles.
Whoa.
And it's just the way that they live. Like
Yeah.
they just run, and they have like this special like food that they make that sustains them, and they go along and they run between the different villages, and they do it with no shoes, and it's been part of their history. It's a really good book. Like,
Cool.
I'm not really a runner, but that book was like, I should actually, Wyatt asked me the other day, what are my favorite books? And that might be up there.
Really?
It's really good.
I'll have to check
I
it out.
totally forgot about it, but what you were saying about the rhythm and the heartbeat and everything, it definitely goes in line with that. It's super cool.
Yeah. Awesome. I'll have to check that out because like I've said that one of my love languages is teasing, and that's, that is part of this kind of trickster energy. And if I'm totally honest, one of the things that I've enjoyed about starting to engage with more intentional running is that one of Jen's previous partners was an ultra marathoner. And so I like being like, I'm a runner now, just to see kind of how she reacts. And it's like that trickster energy of like, what it's like. Cause she was like, an ultra marathoner is so intense. He would run 50, 100 miles, like super nice dude, great guy. He actually used to train me. I was thinking about that this morning. I don't know why. I don't think I ever gave him acupuncture. I don't think we ever did a trade.
Oh, really?
I think it was just like, I think he was just sort of promoting his business and was let me train you a couple times and your acupuncture clients and whatever.
Yeah, he was probably trying to get running clients.
Yeah. But what I was thinking this morning when I was running, I was thinking about him. Was that one of the things that I learned running with him was he kept telling me to slow down. And it was like easing into the run, and I'm listening to the Nike Run Club app, which is awesome. And they talk a lot about that, like easing into a run, and that recovery and like going slower is better. It'll help you run faster when you want to. But anyway, so it's like I get to say like, oh, I'm a runner now. And then Jen just drops all this like running knowledge because she, was dating someone who was like really like that was his business. He was running.
He was excellent at running for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I learned all these random weird things, but I don't run. So I'm like a fair weather runner, I like to call it. I learned one very interesting thing about myself, which is that actually running does not motivate me at all. But I love running when it's a beautiful place and when there is a great breeze. Like, just love that. Like running at the beach in the morning, great breeze. I'm all about it. Or, like there's a beautiful destination that I'm running to, kind of like with a hike. I like to go on a hike where I get to the top of something. I like to achieve that. And same thing for running. If it's a beautiful place or I get to a certain destination, I'm all about it. But if, like running around the neighborhood in Indiana.
These Indiana suburbs aren't doing it for you.
It's a definite no for me on that one. I'm just like, no, I think I'd rather just do yoga at the house or whatever in the backyard.
Yeah, understood.
So much easier for me.
Yeah. Well, part of it for me is like my brothers 20-something years ago ran the San Diego Marathon when I was actually living in San Diego. But at the time, I was in acupuncture school and I was so sick that I was like, I want to do this. And they both asked me not to. They were like, please don't join us in this because like you're too sick. We don't want to be worried about you.
Yeah.
And that was, I've been thinking about it, as I've been running a little bit more and thinking for the first time ever seriously about maybe even running a marathon, was like, that's like the only thing that I can think of that I actually just like totally opted out of when I wasn't feeling well. Everything else that I can remember, I did. Now, it was more challenging. I was looking for bathrooms and worried about my health. And, you just sort of navigate that. Those of you with chronic conditions understand. You just do what you have to do to figure it out. But that particular event, the marathon, was the one that I just flat out opted out. I was like, I'm not healthy enough to do this. Because I was always worried about a bathroom. But then the irony was that when I actually went to support them in the marathon, I realized they had porta potties everywhere. That the marathon might actually be the like one of the best places for those of you that are worried about finding a bathroom in time, because they had bathrooms all over the place.
Yeah, it's like every few, definitely within quarter mile, half a mile for sure.
Yeah. So that's like an extra kind of motivation or thing that bounces around in my head as I'm running or thinking about running and thinking about doing the marathons and stuff. Is like, it'd be nice to kind of have that experience.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think you're going to love it. I think it's a cool accomplishment for people who feel that calling.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those people.
No, I get it.
But I do like the idea of that, what you're talking about, the rhythm of your feet on the ground and like the breath and that rhythmic energy. I really think that just tying it back to sound and what we were talking about earlier, like one of the most impactful sounds for me is the drum. Like just hearing that, I wonder what you think about that of like, do you think that people just started creating that drum to mimic that sound of the heartbeat or open heart? Because I feel like whenever, in ceremonies and different things we've done, when that drum or, in the Native American ceremonies, when that drum beat starts going and it's like those big drums, like it is completely humbling. Like I feel like it just breaks you open and you're just like, wow. It's like there's something that happens when sound interacts with that sacred energy within us that is that rhythm of like drive of life, or I don't know. I just think it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that entrainment aspect where your body matches it and it can set the rhythm. That's why they had drummers like in wartime. It can keep you in time, but also like give you that energy to keep going. And certainly during the sun dances, when there's music and drummers, I've done it with singers and drummers and without, and it's definitely easier
with a drummer
when there's people singing and drumming. And my teacher used to say that that the rattle helps to open energies in the room, and the drum the drum is like the horse, and the drum will carry you, like take you on journeys.
Cool.
So if you're journeying inside yourself or you're journeying to some other astral plane or whatever, like the drum can bring you there. But certainly I think part of why it's so effective is because of our heartbeat. And you think about being in the womb and you're hearing your mom's heartbeat, and it's like, it definitely hits something. It's super primal.
I didn't know that actually about the mom and the baby bonding, but I've been, reading all this stuff about prenatal, and I follow this account on Instagram called Pain Free Birth. And it's amazing some of the stories they have, because I guess in Western medicine, it is common for when the baby is born, just a few minutes after it's born, they take the baby away and, do whatever things, tests and whatever things they do to the baby. But that time, actually, those first few minutes when the baby is born, it's really important to keep the baby near you, because it's used to hearing that heartbeat and that rhythm, and that it can be like, it can go basically into a total fight or flight state, because it's so like it doesn't know what's happening.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't hear that, the only sound that's been consistent and the vibration that's been consistent for it so far in its existence, that can be a dramatic like experience for the baby, and it can really freak out the baby. But the post that I saw, they said that they can actually do all of those tests and different things while the mom is holding the baby, and that you just have to ask them to do it, even though it's more inconvenient for the practitioners, which you can acknowledge, but ask them, hey, like, it's really important to me that, like, I stay close to the baby for, for this and that. And would you mind, doing whatever they're going to do by holding the baby?
And that's where a doula is great, because the doula will like advocate for you, and you'll come up with a birthing plan and whatever. And totally. And that's where, home births and water births and, giving birth in a dimly lit room, all of that is to try to create it to be, to recreate kind of a womb-like environment for the baby. But the way Western medicine does it is just so fucked. I mean, we don't need to get into it now, but like the whole process of birthing in like a hospital is just so completely fucked up. Like, you should not be giving birth laying on your back, legs in the air. That is like the worst position that a person can give birth. And when you look at why they do what they do, almost all of it is for the convenience of the doctor and the nurse. And it's like, it's not taking into account the baby's health and what's best for the baby. Like the placenta, huge thing. You should just let the placenta should keep pumping. You shouldn't cord clamp until like the placenta is done and that all of that blood has been transferred.
Right.
But instead it's just like cut the cord right away, yank the kid from the mom, pour drops in its eyes, slap its ass, like make sure, it's like all these things are just so aggressive. And it's like, what? Why?
Yeah.
My whole thing when Wyatt was born was like, let's just do things as obviously with modern conveniences, but what was the way that they would have done things like 10,000 years ago? And let's just mimic that as close as we can, because while obviously paying attention to the health of the child, but that's what our bodies have evolved to do. It's like that whole idea of putting a baby in another bedroom. Like, why? That is not how it was done. We did not evolve like putting our kids in another teepee or like in some hut far away from the parents. Like, no, everyone's sleeping together under the same, buffalo robe or whatever.
Well, and it could be because of that sound of the heartbeat, right? It's like
It's all of it.
it's
all
just
of
like
it.
that closeness or that energy, that safety, that feeling of like, I'm safe
Yeah.
energy, which I think as a young, vulnerable child, like they could be eaten by whatever.
Right.
Like, they're pretty much helpless when they're tiny like that. So
Totally.
it makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, look, everyone's got to parent their own way. Like, I'm not here to, cast aspersions or like judge you for it. But, I know for me, it's just like, well, what is like, what makes the most sense? Like what feels right. And with my love for, archaeology and prehistory and all of that, it's like, well, what was the environment in which we evolved? Same thing with like all the stuff we talk about with the chemicals and the synthetics and stuff. It's like, no, can we just eat like, why do we have to pay more money for food that has less shit in it? It's like, just give me the organic stuff. If we're paying more for that, and it's like way cheaper if you get something that's made in a lab that's full of all sorts of preservatives and stuff. And if you're like, I just want something that hasn't been messed with too much, and it's like, well, you got to pay 4 times the price for the same thing.
Yeah. Well, that's because subsidies from the government.
All the stuff.
Monsanto. So a much bigger conversation.
Yeah.
That's like a whole separate podcast episode. That's a wormhole we maybe shouldn't open on this one.
Yeah, we're just like dancing around all these things. So,
but I was surprised to hear about. I actually learned something about the reason why women give back birth on their back is actually a king. I forget the name of the king, but he was like obsessed with birth and his wife and the queen. And so I don't know. They had a bunch of kids. But he wanted to be able to see it and be more a part of the process because back before that time, I think it was, in European times, not that long ago, really, compared to like the birthing history of all women. And women would give birth sitting in a chair where they could sit and then also birth. And that was just kind of a normal, common practice.
Yeah.
But because he wanted to see and be a part of his wife giving in that process because he had like a weird fascination with it.
Yeah.
He basically like made her lay down on the bed or like they created like a bed situation so that he could watch and be more a part of the process without having to bend over. And then they started telling their colleagues and different men and that's how it came to be that it
just
was
another example of a white man in power messing with the women's natural way of doing things.
I mean, kind of, but like it's an interesting thing that most men, I think, in general,
they don't want to see that.
They don't want to be a part of that. They don't want to see that. They don't want to know about that time of the month. In which case, it makes sense that the women would just like do their thing, and when we're on our cycles or whatever, it's like we just kind of recluse and
the red tent.
We just go and do our
moon lodge
woman things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can explain more about that because I don't really know much about that in Native American culture, but there's a sacredness. There's just a natural energy of wanting to be alone and maybe connecting with other women, or it's not something that men, all of those things are not something that men are naturally drawn to or understand, really, just because it's so different. Like we have such a cyclical nature and men don't have that same rhythm. And so I think that king becoming fascinated by it and then changing the trajectory so that men could be more a part of it, it's really interesting how that impacted culture for everyone.
Interesting. I never heard that before. Well, it still doesn't change the fact that laying on your back to give birth is the worst position.
No, horrible. But how funny that like women agree to doing this, even though it's not ideal for us and our bodies, just because we want to please the men or because it's like what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, being
it's
compliant,
so bizarre.
making it easier for the doctor and all that. I
Right.
mean, it's like the same reason that some people have like C-sections scheduled. It's like, well, because the doctor's going out of town, so we just scheduled the C-section. And it's like, holy shit, like, wow.
Right.
This is what's happening. I've heard of people scheduling C-sections because they want the kid to have a particular birthday.
Yeah, that's really bizarre.
It's so weird, like this life that we live right now. I look at some of this stuff, I'm just like, I don't understand.
Wait till people start like genetically modifying their kids.
Oh,
to
it's
have,
already
like,
happening.
different color eyes and like,
Oh, that's already happening.
you know,
Yeah.
like facial features that are like more desirable or
Mm-hmm.
so crazy.
Yeah.
Manipulating the DNA.
Well, what was that movie with Ethan Hawke and where he's like, they have like the genetically altered people and then like the
Regular people.
the regular people,
Yeah.
and he wants to be an astronaut or whatever, and so he like goes through this whole process of like getting donor blood because they test all the time. And
Oh, wow.
what was that movie? It was so good.
I don't think I saw that movie.
I think about it a lot. It was
Really?
like there were a lot of like levels to it. And he has this like competition with his brother. That's his brother is like the genetically modified one, and he's like a normie. It's like, it was a great movie. What the hell was it called?
I don't know, but it reminds me of Brave New World, where it's just like now you start getting into classifications of people and it gets really weird.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about like professional sports, right? It's like
Right.
if you have someone who is like modified,
Genetically
altered to have bigger muscles, faster recovery, fast twitch fibers and stuff, and then they're competing against, you know,
regular people.
who did it the old fashioned way. It's like, is that fair?
Yeah. It's
Is
weird.
that right? Like, do we have to have like different classes?
Classifications.
You know?
Yeah.
Or it's just what is? Who knows?
Whoa, the future. Mind exploding. Yeah, I mean, it's coming. It's here, I guess, already.
Yeah,
So interesting. Now we sound like old fogies.
totally. Yeah,
Well,
there's been a lot of that these days.
that's okay.
I'm just like, I don't understand. I don't understand what's happening. Like, why is this happening this way? Like, for when we're watching sports. I was watching the NBA things, the finals, and been watching a lot of golf lately too. And so I'm seeing more commercials than I've seen in the last like several years. If you're just watching Netflix or whatever, you don't really see many commercials.
Right.
And I'm not a huge YouTube guy, so I'm not seeing the commercials before videos there. But it's like the majority of the commercials are all pharmaceutical ads.
Right.
And there's this like total normalization of illness and disease when you watch these, especially watching these pharmaceutical ads. And it's just like, this is so messed up. Like, I know we had those commercials when I was a kid growing up, but it's not like it is today. And it feels like everything today has a diagnosis.
Right.
Where it's like everything has a diagnosis. And if you have a diagnosis, then you can get a drug. You can get a treatment for it.
Right.
And I just think that this kind of identification with a disease, even if you get like a diagnosis that fits and you're just like, oh my gosh, this explains all of the things. Like a friend of ours was like, I think I have sensory processing disorder. And she was all like worked up about it. And it's like, yeah, okay, fine. Like, from the way I look at it, it's like, get the diagnosis, get that assessment, and then forget about it as quickly as possible. Because like that attachment and that over identification to these things, to your disease, to your imbalance, to the suffering, to the symptoms, like it prolongs it. It's like, it's much harder to heal when you're attached to a diagnosis. Because even if you do, it's like once you're attached to a diagnosis, it just becomes about managing the disease.
Right.
And, you know, and it's like everybody these days is pre-something. It's like you're pre-hypertensive, you're pre-diabetic, you're pre-whatever. And it's like everything becomes like centered around a disease, and just this like normalization of like, oh, I can't pay attention. Oh, I have anxiety. Oh, like I have all these food allergies, and like, oh, I don't know, I just gained like 70 pounds and I don't know why it happened. And, you know, or like, oh, my family has a history of back pain and now I have back pain. And just kind of, I don't know, I'm ranting now, but this normalization and just this like acceptance of things that are like not, like, it's just not how things should be.
Right.
Like, we should, you know, not be up in arms about it, but it's like they're like, I want there to be like more resistance to this stuff instead of just being like, oh, I just have this disease or I have this imbalance and this is just who I am.
Right.
And it's like, well, no, that's not who you are. Like, you're way more than that. And also, what is the environment? What has been happening to you that led you to have these symptoms in the first place? And rather than just accepting it, like, let's do what we have to do to create an environment for your body to be able to find a balance again.
Yeah. Even the languaging around it. It's like, it's taking ownership of whatever that disease is. Like, I have a sensory perception disorder.
Totally.
Just like saying that and owning that is an affirmation. It's a confirmation that like you're taking ownership of this disease or this diagnosis that is you, instead of, you know, what if the languaging that the doctor gave you is you're experiencing
Right.
You're experiencing a sensory issue, which I
Right.
think we all have experienced in the past. Like a light is too bright, or the sounds are too loud, or we feel overwhelmed and we want to, recluse back to our comfort. Right?
Right.
We've all experienced
Yeah.
that.
Pair of pants doesn't feel good, and it's like, yeah, that pair of pants doesn't feel good. Does that mean you have a sensory processing disorder, or you
Right.
just don't like wearing those pants?
Right. And you're experiencing discomfort with your
Yeah.
pants. But how different would it be if doctors were to say, oh, you're experiencing, a digestive distress, or you're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing, your body is speaking to you. Your body's having this experience. And like, let's look at what's causing that. Instead of saying you have this disease, and then you're like, I have this thing, and you take it on almost like a name badge,
Right.
or like a backpack that you're heavy and carrying this heaviness. And you create it as part of your own identity, really, when that happens. When we use that language of ownership around it, instead of just saying, oh, I'm experiencing a headache. I'm experiencing, it's not like I have chronic migraines. Like that's such
Yeah.
a different verbal acknowledgement and like energetic taking on of something that may not necessarily need to have ownership over it, because when we have that ownership, it creates some sort of an attachment to it, and it becomes part of us instead of just something that we can freely experience and let go of.
Totally. And you guys, if you've heard my story, it's like this disidentifying from a diagnosis and just bringing back to the present moment of like what is happening right now. Because immediately once there's a diagnosis, then there becomes the concern of the future. And like the messed up part is when people get a diagnosis, they feel like there's some hope. And sometimes there is, because it's like doctors have
Right,
seen this
it's wrong.
before and there might be medication for it and whatever. But I'm telling you, just like in my experience and what I've seen with patients, is that like having that diagnosis at all and being so attached to it creates more problems in the future than actually healing. And the majority of the work that I do interpersonally within myself is the phrase is disidentifying, to disidentify with all of the things that I'm attached to, like good and bad. And this has happened, years ago when I was like, I don't know, 22 or something. I did this deep meditation with a friend of mine, and I felt like I was pulled down to the bottom of the ocean, and I saw like some version of Poseidon, and he was kind of surrounded by these like dolphins. It sounds like I was high, but I wasn't. It was just like a straight up vision. It was really intense. And he basically says to me, like, in order for you to get to where you want to be, you have to forget everything. And he's like, you have to forget all the like the bad stuff and the hard stuff. He goes, but you also have to forget all of the good stuff. All of the things that you like to hold on to, of like, oh, I went to Stanford and like I've accomplished this and I've done that, and like all of those things. He's like, you got to drop all that too. Completely disidentify. And then you can arrive into that present moment. But if we stay attached to any of these things, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a son, it's like if we're so overly identified with those things, then it's hard. You're not free anymore. Instead of recognizing, like, there's times where I'm in father mode, and like I'll visualize myself sometimes like putting on like the father T-shirt, or like the super dad, or wearing the mask, putting on the costume.
You actually do put on your Super Mario shirt.
Yeah,
when
sometimes
Wyatt's
I do
coming.
when he's over. Yeah, for sure.
You're like, I'm in dad mode.
For sure.
Cute.
For sure. And it's like part of that is like, it's like honoring the costume that goes with the role, of like, this is the role that I'm playing. But it's a way to not be overly identified, because just like at the end of a party, you can take that costume off. At the end of the show, you take that costume off, but then like, what are you looking at there? And on some level, we may not ever really be able to completely disidentify. Maybe that happens when we die. But I think it's a valuable exercise. And instead of just sort of accepting things as like normal and like, oh, this is just the way it is, this is just who I am, this is just how I am.
Right.
It's like, well, maybe that's how you've been. It doesn't have anything necessarily to do with how you're going to be. And perhaps there's a way to find some room to disidentify.
Yeah.
Who would I be without the disease? And I've seen this with clients before too, where I remember I had this client with Lyme disease. And she had chronic Lyme, and it was really challenging for her. And then she was like using that to create a foundation for people with Lyme disease, and like the support group for people with chronic Lyme. And I asked her one day, and this might have actually been the last time that she ever came to see me, as sometimes happens when I ask questions. I was like, you know, do you think, or is there a possibility that your like your creation of like this foundation and the support group and like being the face for people with chronic Lyme is impeding your healing?
Mm.
I used to I treated this comedian, John Panette. He's a really fat comedian. He's dead now. He had a great bit about like all you can eat Chinese restaurants. You could find it on YouTube. It's really funny. I treated him for a few times, and one of the things that I asked him too was like, because he came in, he wanted to lose weight because he was like severely obese, and I was like, what's going to happen to your whole stand-up stick?
Right.
Like your whole thing is about how you're so fat,
Right.
And it's like, these are some of the issues when we become overly identified with stuff. And perhaps it's been a detriment to me professionally also, because like I don't want to be identified as like just the acupuncturist or like some shamanic healer or
Right.
whatever, and like trying to skirt the issue with some of these labels is probably, it's probably why it's easier for me just sometimes to sit in the back and play the trickster than because I don't want to be overly identified with a particular role.
Well, because there's pitfalls in that,
Yeah.
And it's like, and then you have the whole guru thing, and then everyone is like, oh, like you're this person and you do this, and then you get pigeonholed, and it's not maybe the full expression of who you are, and it's not a accurate depiction of the multifacets that all of us are and our different gifts and the way that we show up. And for branding, it is kind of important though.
Yeah.
But also, like, who cares? You just live your life and do
Yeah.
something different.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to be that. And I think that a lot of times, at least my experience in that world of the people who do set themselves up on that pedestal and put themselves in that position, it's, where people like look up to them and they're like, oh, the shaman or the guru, and like, oh, my teacher, that kind of energy. It usually ends pretty badly because there's a lack of humility and humanism in that relationship. And when, of course, like, it doesn't matter who your teacher or who your guru is, like, they still have problems.
Right.
They still
Right.
have bad days. They still make bad choices. They still deal with the same trickster that's pulling on their moral compass, and they're trying to figure out who they are and who they want to be.
Yeah.
And when the student discovers that, it's just like this fall from grace. It's
Yeah.
almost like what happens with most children, I think, as they learn that their parents aren't God.
Yeah.
It's like you just look up to your parents so much when you're a kid, and at some point that little bubble gets burst and you're like, oh, my parents are just normal people, like figuring it out like me. And
Yeah.
maybe they're not as idyllic as I thought they were.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily, that's not ideal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then there's that total disconnect where it almost feels dishonest in a way, which I think is what you're saying. It's like, yeah, I'm this thing. I identify as this. I can play this role, but there's also more there, and it's not overly attaching to that because it feels dishonest.
Yeah, but then there is also just something to the other side of it. Just like, well, just remember that you're just playing a game. It's all just a game.
Totally.
So play the game and like play it well. And you can't play it well if you're hiding in the back, unless the game is to be invisible. But so one of the things that I've been doing in the last month or so to like facilitate this process, and I'll be curious to hear from you guys if you choose to do it, is I start paying attention anytime I use the word my. So my, mine, have, had, any of that stuff. The ownership, right? Yeah. To show where I'm so identified with things like my money, my job, my labeling, my branding, my videos, my podcast, my son, and to be like, wow, I've like so identified with it and claiming it and owning it. And then what does that mean about me and that? It's like, if it's my son, it's no longer Wyatt who's just free to be Wyatt. It's like he's becomes a reflection of me somehow. And, like the way he lives is like so connected to me rather than him being free to be him,
Right.
My wife, it's like, what does that mean? It's like, no, that's Jen. But if it becomes my wife, it's something different.
Yeah. I like that.
What? Being my wife? Or being Jen? Free
well,
to be Jen.
I don't want to be someone else's wife.
Thank God for that. Cheers to that. That's
Yeah.
it.
But I like the wife. You can just call me the wife.
The wife.
The wifey boss, Jen.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Wifey Boss, for coming on to the show. It's always great to have you here.
Yeah, this is great. This is a fun episode.
We did it.
It turns out the temperature for us actually does matter in the van.
Makes a
Of
difference.
How good the podcast
And the time
is.
of day, too. You didn't fall asleep halfway through
I
the
didn't
episode.
fall asleep. I didn't have any like major just space out time to go to bed moments. It's great.
Yeah. And the platitude platypus didn't make an appearance.
No, she's sleeping. She's waiting till later to come out.
Yeah, perfect. All right, I'll go for another run then. Let me know when she's on her way. All right, guys, thank you so much for your support and for listening. As always, you can email the show, pleasurepointspodcast@gmail.com, or hit me up on Instagram @JamesERoar. Until next time, have a great week.